have two people from Blueprint. Matthew Agnew is the Director of Product Marketing at Blueprint Software Systems and is responsible for understanding the challenges businesses face when automating their processes and then articulating this knowledge to the rest of the Blueprint team. That's the ultimate challenge. And a second Matthew, which will make it tricky on questions, Matthew Dodgson is the Director of Solution Engineering at Blueprint and has developed a deep knowledge of what businesses need and when they want to improve, how do they improve their RPA processes, and uses that knowledge to support enterprise clients around the world. So let me turn that over to Matthew, and I will disappear and go quiet. Gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you for that fantastic introduction. I feel like I'm going to have to ask Chris to come with me wherever I go and introduce me around the world. So, Matt, how you doing this morning?
Not bad, Matthew. How about yourself? And thanks, Chris, for introducing us.
Yeah, and we, like I said, we like to confuse people here where everyone at Blueprint is named Matthew, so it's confusing and easy. So just call Blueprint and ask for Matthew, you'll get somebody. So today we are talking about RPA migration, as Chris mentioned, and it's a pretty interesting topic. And just a little bit of view on us quickly. So we're Blueprint. We're a software company that is built to help organizations improve how they automate. And today we're going to be focusing on one of the more confusing aspects of RPA and really any intelligent automation initiative, and that's moving from one platform to another. So as I mentioned, I'm joined here by our Director of Solution Engineering, and today we got a really great agenda for you today. So we're going to be talking about giving an overview of our understanding of RPA migration, of what we've seen in the industry and how other companies are facing this, barriers, what's getting in the way, and how we can simplify this process with Blueprint. Give you a little bit of overview of really what Blueprint's been looking at to make this less of a challenge for companies. So to start, and just to recap what Chris mentioned earlier, so migration, another term we've been, or platform replatforming, so moving from or redeploying, so moving existing processes, so automated processes from one RPA platform to another. This is something we've been running into quite a bit. We've been seeing that, and I'm curious. So we'll start with Matt. Why do you think companies are looking to migrate RPA platforms?
Well, a few of the, Chris mentioned a few of them where there's just a technology evolution. A lot of organizations have started on one platform when they first began their automation journey, not really knowing much. And as they kind of grew into what automation meant for them at their company, they, decided different technologies may suit the types of systems and applications and types of automations that they're building. So we see a lot from that, from the technology side. Sometimes, I've seen it with quite a few folks where they're trying to de-risk their automation infrastructure, where they don't want to be dependent just on one platform, so they actually want to spread it across multiple platforms. So in some cases, they're not even replatforming; they're actually just adding platforms and moving bots around. But those are a few of the factors that I've seen.
Great, Matt. Is there any more specific type things that you see? We know there's there's more and more RPA companies growing. Any more specific challenges that you've encountered?
Specific ones that we've seen, obviously, there's been, I know there's a lot of turmoil in the automation space. There's a lot of new technologies coming out, a lot of older technologies changing. So a lot of it has been, as these new technologies come up, people want to leverage them and take advantage of them and really leverage these newer technologies because the older ones are just not holding water. They're not maintaining. So there, a lot of it is from a technology side, it seems to be, but the reality is it's the same automation practice. You're just trying to move it to a new platform.
Absolutely. And this is a really common issue with any technology that you're using, right? Something else comes along, you want to consider it there. So it's a pretty common thing. And things that we've been seeing, so there are a lot of benefits that companies are even considering this, right? Because we've mentioned it is a fairly challenging thing, and we're going to talk about that in a few moments here. But really, it's kind of a scary thing. Chris really set the table for that, where once you're in one RPA platform, it can be pretty daunting to think about moving everything over to another. But there are a lot of really good benefits for doing that, for moving your bots and your processes from one place to another. One of the big ones we've seen is cost savings. Of course, that's the big thing driver for everybody. If you believe that there's cost savings in using another RPA tool, why not look at it? Another one that we've seen a lot in the industry, and this one speaks a little bit more specifically to Microsoft and Microsoft Power Automate Desktop, and that's companies that want to leverage their existing partnership. So if you're an organization really heavy on the Microsoft side, you work with organizations, tools, you're really familiar with Microsoft, it just makes sense that now that Power Automate is evolving, that'd be something that you would want to take advantage of and use as well. And we all want to reach our goals faster. I can't think of anybody that says, no, let's slow down. We don't want to reach our goal too soon, right? So we all want to reach our goals faster. And of course, looking at other options, looking at consolidating your processes on one spot or moving to a different platform can really help that happen. And of course, the leveraging internal. You have a specific developer that is really good at another platform, or you don't want to get too caught into one. Like that's another challenge I know we've seen where it stops people from even considering moving, where all of our skill sets are on this one platform, so why would I even look at another one? So I know that's something that has kind of stealing a bit of the thunder from the next slide is, and I'll ask you, Matt, this again, what do you see that's getting in the way? So what else is stopping people from making this decision in the first place?
Yeah, so the migration on paper, like you said, the cost savings is one of the largest drivers that people tend to gravitate towards, of just, hey, running our bots on platform A is going to be cheaper than running our bots on the current automation platform we have. But getting there is essentially, you have a bridge you have to cross. You have to get all your automations from one platform to another. And in many cases, the biggest challenge essentially is you're rebuilding all of those automations from scratch. And I mean, there's a cost there. And then obviously the skill set required to do that rebuilding. The automation space is very ripe with a lot of talent and a lot of people that have been highly specialized on these different platforms. And it's something that I know a lot of technical folks are starting to become more skilled on multiple platforms, but there's many folks I know that have multiple layers of certification on something like Blue Prism's platform. And then as the company wants to move to Power Automate Desktop, they have to reskill themselves on that. So it's almost, it becomes a skill set challenge too, where you have to have skilled developers that know two platforms very deep, because they have to read automations from one platform to implement them in another.
Exactly, I completely agree. And I thank Chris again for really setting the table, because his attitude and of this topic really is common in the industry, where it is a scary thing. And I think one of the things that we're coming to see, where it doesn't necessarily have to be that scary. These benefits are real, so you can see a lot of benefits, you can save money. So I think we want to reassure people that you don't necessarily need to be so scared that you don't even consider looking at other platforms. Like we definitely have talked to very large businesses that don't even consider it, because it's once you're here, why would you even want to move? But there are very, very real benefits, and it's really worth kind of getting over that initial hurdle. And just to kind of recap some of the barriers that we're talking about here. So again, moving from one RPA platform to another, there's a couple questions you should ask when you're thinking about doing this. So a couple things that you should really make sure that you have a good understanding, solid grasp on before you really move into this process. And that is your resource availability. This is one of the things that stops people from doing this right away. This is a very common stop sign early on in the process, where it's, do I even have the team to do this? Or do we even have the team to rebuild all of these bots and these automations and these processes in this new system? They have to relearn a new system, and then they have to map everything over, and they have to test it and check it. Do I have people available to do this? So what's the cost? And one of the things that I always ask with that is, not only what is the cost of that, but when you do have people doing that, what's not happening? Right? So that definitely isn't really their core job. So what isn't getting done in your organization when people are spending months moving existing bots over from another? That could set you back really years if you think about it. So that's an important thing to be looking at. Another one that we've talked about here, and Matt really covered really clearly, is skill set. Do you have the skills to understand two separate RPA platforms? Some of them are similar, but some of them are quite different. And moving things over from one, it's not just taking something and moving it over here. It's not like you're moving houses where you're just moving furniture from one place to another. It's a very complicated and difficult task between some of these platforms. And you have to think, do you have the skill set to do this? So that's another thing you should always ask yourself. And where can you get those skill sets? What is that going to cost to get those skill sets? we'll be able to continue to leverage these skill sets moving forward. And importantly, time. Again, ask yourself, what's not getting done when we're doing this? That's a really important one. How long do you think this is going to happen? You know, very, very large organizations. I heard an interesting stat the other day where very, very large, you know, one of the biggest companies in the world really was wanted to move some bots, and it took them almost a year to migrate 15 bots. And it's because, again, it can be a complicated process, and they had thousands and thousands of bots. So that's another thing to ask yourself. How long is this going to take, and what's not happening when I'm doing this? So in just a minute, I'm going to turn things over to Matt, and Matt is going to be walking us through how Blueprint is designed to help make this a lot easier. So Blueprint, so we're a software company, and we have a tool utility that's designed to really make this not as much of the headache that we've kind of painted earlier. Not that we painted what it is. And we're going to be going through that in just a moment. But before we get into that, I just want to talk about our general approach to replatforming and migrating your bots from one spot to another. So first, you want to analyze what you're looking at. So you need to have the ability to take all of your bots, all of your processes, your automated processes, and look at them holistically. So you have to look at all of them and plan. A lot of times you're going to find, even before you start moving, that 25 to 30% of your bots are redundant, right? Or aren't even being used, that you don't need. You might find that another 10%, 15% of your bots are really, really inefficient, maybe very expensive. We've heard stories where you can find that a bot, just from licensing alone, the licensing that you need, licensing fees that you need for this bot to work, could cost you $300,000 a year. And so we've heard these stories, and it's important to analyze and look at those things now, because it's not just, let's not just move over, let's get better while we're doing this. So of course, plan. Let's look at what we're doing, and we want to do this in a very, very solid way that isn't going to set back the business. One of the scary things when you think about this too is, are some of our bots going to be offline for a period of time? I mean, you could have bots that are a very critical part of your customer journey that you don't want offline. So you have to think, how can I move my bots in iterations so these processes are grinding to a halt and we don't have customers complaining? So that's a really important thing as well. And then of course, all this is being done before we get to the actual migration. So actually moving things over and creating them in the new platform. So that's our general approach. So analyze, plan, and migrate. And now I'm going to switch things over to Matt, and Matt is going to walk through how Blueprint can use that approach to make things go a little bit easier for you.
Perfect.
So Matt, I just switched the screen over to you.
All right, I will share my screen here momentarily once I find the right monitor. There we go.
Perfect.
Confirm you can see everything.
Yep, I'm all good.
Awesome. So I want to obviously take you guys through an example of how we do this today at Blueprint. And specifically, you know, we talked about a lot of different factors to consider, a lot of the variables. And this is something that we're not trying to scare anyone. Migration is something that hundreds of organizations are going through today, and hundreds more are continuing to get to in the next, you know, daily and weekly. So it's something really about understanding what a migration takes, understanding how you can control it and manage it, and not let it get out of hand, and not assume you can just jump in and do it at the snap of a finger, because it's a simple word, migration, but there's a work stream and a workflow around it. So what you're seeing on your screen is Blueprint. Blueprint is a web-based, cloud-hosted solution that uses this idea of something we call digital blueprints to really translate and help us re-platform these automations. And it helps us analyze those automations that we want to migrate, helps us plan that migration, and then it helps us actually do that migration. Now, before we dive into things in too much detail, I'll give you a quick orientation. On the left here is this Explorer, where we're going to look at we're going to import and look at the automations that we want to migrate. In the middle here is where we're going to review these automations, review the numbers and the metrics before we actually do that migration. And then we have this utility panel over here on the right, where we're going to be able to see some extra details and nuances around that automation and some of the mapping that's being done. So today, I'm going to take you through an example of this Automation Anywhere bot that I have, and I'm going to migrate it over to Microsoft's Power Automate desktop. This is one of just many scenarios where you're migrating from things like Blue Prism and Automation Anywhere. In this case, it's the V11, to some of the newer platforms like Power Automate Desktop, and even UiPath is a very common one we see a lot of folks migrating towards today. Now, this particular bot generates reports that are extracted from Excel data. I would call it a medium complexity bot. It's around 500 lines of code. And if you were to take on this migration and sit down and say, hey, I want to migrate this today without any, blueprint or any other approach, it's about a 4 or 5 week endeavor. And that's essentially because you're rebuilding the entire automation from scratch. So let's actually show you how we help manage and drive that life cycle when using Blueprint. So with Blueprint, what we do is we start by taking your existing automations and we import them in. This essentially allows us to turn your automations into what we call digital blueprints. Think of this like how we translate, complicated items. We turn them into this kind of common generic format. This allows us to extract and understand your current automation in great detail, as I'll show you here in a moment. And then it also helps us map and understand how we're going to transform that particular automation from one technology stack or one language of Automation Anywhere over into a new platform in the Power Automate desktop world. So here, I actually imported twice. That's fine, we'll look at it. So here's the automation we just pulled in. Now what we've done is we've actually created a digital blueprint from that automation. This ensures all the code and details in the original automation are captured and understood. An importing process takes only a few minutes. So whether you're bringing in a single bot or bringing in an entire stack, you're actually going to have that entire automation here. But before we actually go through and complete the migration, let's actually go into the dashboard and review this particular automation. Because what we can do in Blueprint is we can actually take a deeper look at the actual automation itself. In this particular case, we have actually, you know what I'll do? Let's simplify this. Let me delete the extra one that we had. We don't need that one. Just delete that. And we'll get rid of that. Now we can look at this one automation. So this one automation is comprised of a number of processes. It has a certain number of steps and variables and actions that are built in. And what these digital blueprints do is they break down those automations into those kind of atomic elements, and they allow us to start getting a deeper understanding of what actually makes up this bot. So in this case here, this particular bot has about 500 steps. It's broken up over 3 processes. You can see there's actually some complexity that we indicate and give you some insight on for each of these processes so you can better understand them. And it really helps you understand not just the details of the bot, but how it's going to map when I want to move it over into something like Microsoft's Power Automate Desktop. This particular automation has about a 97% mapping accuracy from Automation Anywhere over to Power Automate Desktop. And that's really to say that the commands that we're using in Automation Anywhere have equivalent commands over in Power Automate Desktop, and the 97% of that bot is going to map. Now for the remaining 3% that might not map, this is where Blueprint actually gives you the ability to go deeper and actually print out a detailed report that will itemize every single line of code and will tell you what's going to map, what's not going to map, so you can actually plan and better understand exactly the work that's going to be needed to complete this bot and complete this automation once you're over in Microsoft's Power Automate Desktop. But before I actually do the migration, let me give you a quick look in terms of what an actual digital blueprint looks like. This is the digital blueprint for this particular process flow. It helps us visualize the automation logic and structure, and it's broken down as a set of processes and steps. And every step in that particular automation, like this one here on the message box, is not only captured, but it's also mapped and understood with something we call our common object model. This is kind of an RPA generic language or kind of an automation dialect that we've built out in Blueprint. This common language is a repository of language elements that are found across all the major RPA platforms. And because this common language is not only mapped from the automation we're pulling in, but where we want to go, it acts as a sort of RPA translator. So instead of spending weeks reading through the code, trying to understand how it might map to UiPath, how many steps are in there, what types of commands are in there, Blueprint has done all of this analysis automatically by simply importing the bot and creating a digital blueprint. And this is part of that analyze and plan phases that are so important when it comes to actually doing a migration, because it really helps you understand what you're migrating. When you want to talk about resource availability, time, and skill set, those factors, you can't really answer that question until you really answer the question of, well, what is the bot we're migrating? What do they look like? How are they comprised? And what sort of skill sets are we going to need? But now that we've actually reviewed the imported bot, we turn into a digital blueprint, we're ready to actually migrate it over to Microsoft's Power Automate desktop. And that's a very simple process. We simply export this entire automation over to Power Automate desktop as a single flow. This will grab, in the Automation Anywhere world, it'll grab all the ATMX files that are included in that particular automation. It'll package them up and it'll actually send it directly into Microsoft's Power Automate desktop, creating a single flow in Power Automate desktop for all of those different ATMX files and individual task bots that we had over in Automation Anywhere. So now that that's actually sent over, let's pull up the automation over here in Power Automate desktop and have a look. All right, so here is the automation we just exported. Now, for those who aren't familiar with Power Automate desktop, and this might be new, I'll give you a quick orientation explain, but essentially the entire automation that we had from AA, from Automation Anywhere, that was turned into a digital blueprint has now been directly exported over and converted into Power Automate desktop commands, flow structure, and subflows, meaning all of that logic, all of the details in how that bot runs and the different subcalls it's making are all packaged in here. And you'll notice all of the individual steps, that one, for example, display message command or the message box command we were just looking at over in Blueprint is right here over in Power Automate desktop. And so this is the translation that's happening when we actually do the migration. But it's also worth noting it's not just the individual automation structure and the commands themselves, which are incredibly important. It's also all of the flow variables, all of the logic, any UI elements or selectors have also been converted. So this migration is very deep and it's very encompassing to make sure that as an organization that's going through these replatforming initiatives, that you're really focused and you're focusing your resources on where it's needed, which in this case is going to be that 3% of steps and commands that aren't covered in Power Automate desktop. And so that's where, as a developer, you'll focus. You'll even notice there's little messages in here like to-dos that call out specific areas that you're going to need to dive into. So let me just take a step back. Why is all of this important? Well, it means that we can migrate these automations in a fraction of the time. A manual migration of this automation would have taken weeks because essentially we'd have to rewrite it from scratch. In less than 5 minutes here, you've seen me take an Automation Anywhere process and migrate it into Power Automate desktop, giving it, now providing a developer all the details they need to take this migrated automation and have it up and running in a matter of days into production, as opposed to the months or weeks it would normally take. And this is the big shift that we've been helping organizations go through, is as they look at these migration initiatives, these replatforming efforts, and they're staring, Matthew Agnew mentioned that one company that took a year to do 15 automations because they had to rebuild every automation from scratch. This is helping customers and helping organizations that have citizen development teams, that have distributed, lines of business that are doing their own automations, all follow the same steps and practices around how can we migrate effectively, how can we migrate efficiently, and more importantly, how can we get it done in a meaningful time so that we're not paying for 2 licenses at the same time. We can actually, get this done before we have to renew our contract with our previous RPA platform. So this is what we wanted to take you guys through today. And the last thing I'll leave you with is within Blueprint, we're showing you an example of replatforming and migration, but these digital blueprints are something that organizations are using not just to drive replatforming and migration, but also be able to start cataloging and consolidating their RPA platforms across the different lines of business to create a single record of all the different automations they have, whether they're building automations, whether they're reusing automations, or if they're even, for example, starting to develop their entire process repository across different lines of business. So while migration is a project that you may be taking on, one of the things that Blueprint is helping these organizations do is not just replatform, but also help to really start to understand the processes that are automated across the organization, and even the processes they are working to automate as they do things like process discovery, task capture, and so forth. And that's everything we wanted to cover today. So I will pass it back to Matthew for any wrap up or conversation points that he had.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Matt. So just a quick reminder here, we do have some time for questions, so please submit your questions. As Chris mentioned, we'll be getting to those in just a moment. And I just wanted to say that while we talked about how Blueprint can help make this smoother, we hope that going over this entire process makes you not as scared of the concept of migration if that's something you're looking at, because it is a very valuable thing right now. So as we mentioned, there's lots of benefits to it, and as I've talked to many people that just kind of, we're fine, right? That don't even want to approach it because they just see it so daunting. It doesn't have to be. So just want to make sure that that's clear for everybody. And yeah, so Chris, we'll turn it back over to you for questions.
I'm just going to tell you, I stood next to you guys at a booth not too long ago, right? Your company at a booth.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was so worried about my book, I didn't focus on what you guys were doing. This is the first time I've seen your full. Where were you 3 years ago when I needed you? That's all I can say. I mean, I was thinking there's several fantastic things about, this is what happens when you get process and innovation geeks in one place, right? I'm thinking about the Saturn V rocket that launched the Apollo projects. I don't know if you guys realize this, but they destroyed all the plans for the Saturn V rockets. So they can't rebuild the Saturn V rockets. And it costs like $50 billion to make these things, right? Well, no one on this call has a $50 billion automation problem, but a lot of people on this call are going to need to know how to transform and evolve going forward in the future, right? NASA didn't get it right, and you guys just did. So that is actually really cool. I do have a couple of questions. Actually, I have 2 more questions than we have for time. I would ask anybody on the call. I know that Matt and Matt would both respond to any question you send them. So hopefully they can find you in the LinkedIn connections, or if we've got the emails directly for you, we can do that as well. All right, so let me start with one. It was a question that was near and dear to my heart from Bill in Oregon. In your experience, how transportable are RPA skill sets between platforms?
Good question. So
good question.
Not to go too far down a rabbit hole, and I will keep myself on the ramble meter down here, but each RPA platform has a different approach, and we're seeing different categories. Just to give you kind of my perspective on what I've seen in the industry, Blue Prism has a very specific architecture and skill set and structure that it uses. UiPath is a little bit deeper in developer. Automation Anywhere and Power Automate Desktop have a lot more similarities than the others. So for example, when we see organizations transforming from AA to Power Automate Desktop, we've seen those resources have an easier time scaling up on Power Automate Desktop because it has a lot of transparency and similarity to Automation Anywhere. Going from Blue Prism or going from Blue Prism to like a UiPath, very different, almost oil and water, where there's a different depth you have to go into. And it's not to say, developers actually have an amazing capacity to learn these things. It's really learning the grammar and terminology and the syntax of those new technologies. So it's definitely not something that is consistent across all the RPA platforms, but there is a common learning path. And what we've been trying to do is even give people some direction, saying you don't have to be a UiPath black belt to actually complete this migration. We'll highlight the specific lines of code that you have to go and work on. Just go and learn how to do, how to do a SOAP call in UiPath, which isn't really used anymore. So you have to figure out how to change that to a different type of call. Those are the types of things that we've seen, or at least I have.
That's very helpful. Hopefully Bill agrees with that. William, sorry, agrees with that. What I'm hearing as we listen to the questions in this ecosystem of what's going on, there are people, there's always people who fantasize that it's all going to be simple, right? We're going to implement all this stuff and it's going to run like a Swiss watch for the rest of eternity, which, by the way, you still have to service Swiss watches, right? What I'm hearing is this is a really useful tool to get from point A to point B, but it's also an incredibly important tool to back to the Saturn V rocket. What if you need to rebuild the thing and you need to know what it looks like and you have a plan, right? So it's clear to me that the investment, the long-term investment in automation is never going to stop. It's not like a one-time thing. Mm-hmm. And you're going to need to have a cadre of people who really know what they're doing, just as you do in any other IT solution, right? You don't,
Absolutely.
you don't launch an ERP and then not have experts who know how to work with it. Although I did work for a couple of companies who make a lot of money helping people with that. All right, a couple more questions for you. So here's like a mid-flight question. What are some of the challenges that you see in the middle of this migration exercise? So you talked a lot in the, getting people over the hump of the idea, and then now they're mid-flight, right? The enthusiasm part, they got over that, now they're going. What about those challenges?
So there's, I mean, Matthew, I can feel free to chime in with it with what you've seen. We actually, interestingly enough, we've engaged with a lot of customers who are mid-flight through migration. So we sometimes come in midway through and say, hey, this is a lot more than you thought. So a lot of the migration challenges that organizations face today that don't have Blueprint are they've jumped in to migration. Hey, we got to get off of Blue Prism by June because we don't want to renew, just to give you an example. So they jump in, they start doing it, and very quickly they open the box and they're like, whoa, this is like a Mary Poppins purse of fun that we have to unpack. And I don't want to go into the layers of whether they built the bots or even they had them outsourced and built them through vendors, but very quickly it slows down to a grinding halt. So what we come in and we, again, focus on this idea of analyze, plan, and migrate. The easiest way to migrate efficiently is to make sure you understand what you're migrating and you have a plan for how you're going to migrate each bot. And that might mean prioritizing which ones are going to be the hairiest, which ones are the low-hanging fruit we can get done quickly. Maybe we can't get them all migrated before we renew, and we can drop our renewals down from 100 bot runners to 50 bot runners. So it's really giving organizations these different levers and most importantly, giving them visibility. So when you talk about being mid-flight, if you're mid-flight through a migration, we can definitely help. For our customers who are doing migrations and they are mid-flight, what they're finding is they're now able to really start tuning and becoming more efficient and more predictive on how consistent their migration efforts are. We have one big customer that's doing a couple thousand migrations off of AA to Power Automate Desktop, and they're doing it through a citizen developer program. So what they've actually started to do is they've started to have these waves of training and these waves of enablement for the citizen developer saying, hey, this is your migration path. This is how you migrate. And so it's just allowed them to be more consistent in how they are migrating and how their bots are actually moving over, and they're not kind of facing this slowdown, this drudgery that happens mid-flight when you don't have, a plan or an approach. Long-winded answer, but I hope that helps.
Sorry, I was just going to jump into another quick challenge that we've seen that's worth discussing. So when people are doing this manually, I noticed people are finding that the quality of the process is dipping. And a lot of that's been because there's been a big focus on speed. So, and a lot of times, it's, what's the old, when they say, good, fast, cheap, pick two. So
right.
It's, when they're doing this, they're finding that the process is, there's more errors in it. It's not working as smoothly as it did before when you do it manually.
Matthew,
so that's
Matt, for clarification, are you referring to the process that the bot is running or the process of making the migration?
The process that the bot is running. So taking the process and moving it from platforms that they're finding there's a bit of a dip in, there's a bit of a dip in quality once they've moved it over to, say, Power Automate Desktop, because again, the focus was on speed and not necessarily the quality of it. And again, there could be a little bit lost in translation. So more errors, things like that.
You just set up another great question from William, and I clearly William's got his hands deep in this stuff, right? His question is, how sensitive to developer this is a great question. How sensitive to developer eccentricities in the existing bots are your migration tools? And what is the effect of non-standard bot building in the existing bots on automating migration between platforms? I love the word eccentricities. If they did a crappy job with the bot, how does your tool handle that? I think that's what the question is.
So I'll let Matt give Matt, I'll let you give the technical answer. I just want to give real quick a setup that I heard a developer said that I think they used the word magical to describe the process that we use, because there's times where, for example, I know that selectors can be a finicky thing that tends to move over fairly smoothly within Blueprint. So I've heard and this is me from the non-technical approach, just hearing that finicky developers, a lot of times are surprised with how well things move over. So Matt, I'll let you give your technical.
Yeah, automation is of no is definitely one. You see a lot of eccentricities, and you see the human element with how developers have built automations. And for the most part, no one's being malicious in how they build bots, but sometimes you see someone use an automation to just wrap a bunch of SOAP calls. And it's like, okay, that's one way to do that. What we've been able to do, and largely what we've focused on are, and I want to say good practice. It's really more using automations to do tedious tasks. And that's really the focus. Is there's simple things these automations are designed to do. And complex automations don't necessarily do complex operations. They do just more simple operations to achieve a longer set of steps. And so what we found is when we get eccentricities that show up in how someone's built an automation, it may be, and Blue Prism is a perfect example where you can do anything you want in Blue Prism, violating every logical construct of, looping and an automation structure. We actually clean that up when we import them in. So this idea of a digital blueprint kind of creates a level playing field. And that's one of the things we've been trying to promote is as you import them in a digital blueprint, we will sanitize it and turn it into a common framework that will transport, that will actually move over. We're starting to go deeper to look for maybe particular development patterns that you don't want to be looking for. Maybe you don't want passwords in there. Maybe you want to make sure things are named consistently and more conventions. So that's kind of our next level of detail. But in terms of eccentricities, we try to catch those on the import and clean them up. And then in some cases, what we've been doing with customers is as we've been looking at their RPA estate, the automations they don't import, those are the ones that usually have some specific eccentricities where a bot wasn't built correctly. So those will be ones to clean up before we even try to do the migration. So the human element is definitely something we consider, and it's definitely something that's a factor, and it's part of the migration experience. But the fact is, you know about those eccentric automations before you try to migrate them. That's probably the key element in that.
I love, it's really strange. I'm in this chair role, right? I'm supposed to be, orchestrating. I'm fascinated by what you guys are talking about because this is so useful and so relevant. I sound like I'm a shill for Blueprint, and I don't mean that. I mean, I think of myself as a practitioner. And when I said, crappy automations, we all know that what looks crappy can be an innovation. Someone finds a way to innovate things in a completely different way, and it becomes the new standard. But I think, William's question was, how can you adapt? And if I were on this call listening into you guys, I would say, I want to go deeper. I want to spend more. I know you'll respond to that. If someone sends you an email, you can take them through the details. All right, so I got a couple other questions. And this is kind of the Saturn V question. Other than the time savings, which you clearly demonstrated that, and I can't, the tedium of rewriting these things is just horrible, not to mention the human error of getting them wrong, right? So the time savings is huge. What other benefits would you describe for having this Blueprint is the name of your company, but if you had an electronic, if you have this, like, this is what our automation is, what other benefits would you associate with that?
Yeah, and I'll start here, and Matthew, feel free to chime in as well. But the digital blueprints are interesting for our customers because this idea, and you mentioned the Saturn V rocket, and I love that analogy. A lot of time we pour blood, sweat, and tears into building something. In this case, we're building an automated process. All of the intellectual property and tribal knowledge that goes into building that process essentially gets baked into the code. It's baked and it's kind of locked into this one format. These digital blueprints are allowing organizations to kind of reclaim these assets and pull them out of this sort of specific technology box that only certain people understand. And it puts it in the generic format of a digital blueprint that, we can get better insight on. So I've had customers that send me an automation, and in 10 minutes, I can tell them more about that bot than they know today, just from the number of steps, the type of systems it works with, because we can actually pop the hood and actually analyze it. So that insight has been huge, and that's a huge value. But then there's a snowball effect that happens here when you think about your automation programs. Well, when we're building, let's say we've acquired a company, they have a bunch of automations. Well, they have something for accounts payable. We're trying to build an automation in accounts payable. Wouldn't it be great if we could reuse that? Oh, they built it in Blue Prism and we're using UiPath. Well, the beauty of a digital blueprint is you pull in that automation from accounts payable. You now have a framework. You can export it over to UiPath, or you can just take that digital blueprint and start to modify it right in Blueprint, and you get a half-built bot that's over in UiPath within a couple days, and now you're building out an automation from an automation that already exists. So the ability to reuse these automations, the ability to have insight. It just gives your organizations a better velocity on driving consistent automation throughput and a consistent automation program.
So there I am. I'm back in my job selling this stuff to companies all over the world, right? I would say two things you guys have done. There are many things you've done, but two things to answer to this person's question. One, you are going to keep every RPA company on their toes. They're not going to get complacent with a bunch of entrenched garbage that you can't, because the transition costs are so extreme, right? You're going to keep everyone on their toes, which is fantastic. And so that's a huge plus. And you've given companies a nimbleness in what they can do with this stuff going forward, right? It's just, so anyway, I'm sounding a little bit too much. I should ask you tough questions like, so what are your biggest disasters? We don't need to go in there right now. All right, well, look, I think I got time for one more. Let me see if I got another question to answer on the list. There's a lot of questions with a little thin bar. I think I'm good on, what are the effects? Okay, I got one more. We talked about, I covered that one. Okay, so your thoughts on transition and a big phrase that comes up, the citizen developer, right? Now, I don't know how far that's going to go or not go, but what are your thoughts of using the complementary or non-complementary aspects of what you do with the citizen developer world?
Yeah, so I mean, we have the benefit of having a few customers that are actually have a citizen development program. One I mentioned was going from AA to Power Automate Desktop. So the interesting thing for us is, again, how do we give a consistent approach and a consistent process? So I think that's one of the things that citizen development movements are often challenged with, is how do you empower your organization, empower the technically savvy people in your organization to be independent in how they build their bots and how they manage their bots. Or in the case of this company, the citizen developers own the migration of their own bots because the COE doesn't have the bandwidth to do that. And so what this has allowed, what we're seeing is it's allowing companies a way to help A, re-platform, but B, just even start to consolidate and almost act as a process hub. Start to act as a way to consolidate all the automations so they can either reuse things, or if someone's building a new automation, they can go and look through what's already built, what can I borrow from. So these are some of the practices as you start to get into things like citizen development that really enable and empower that program. Because yes, these people need to be technically savvy on building automations, but so much of automation is just an extension of process, of understanding a process and automating a process. So having a hub of process to start from creates a much bigger accelerator and a much more consistent value driver and time to value multiplier.
I think citizen.
Sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
I think citizen developer. It's almost a problem in the fact where it's an easy sounding word. People say citizen developer and they get excited.
Right. Right.
I've been in the IT space and the tech space for a long time, and I at one point was kind of a citizen developer myself, and it's very difficult. I've tried to use Power Automate to just solve very small things, and it works for a minute. It doesn't. You need way more help than you think, and it's to Matt's point, you really do need a program around it. You can't just say, here are some tools, citizen developers, go use this and make your life better, right? You have to have a program around it.
I love this. I was in Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma for years, and they would say, oh yeah, everybody will be a green belt all over the business. Well, those people all had real jobs, right? They didn't have time to go fixing the process. They were responsible for, getting loans through the business or whatever. Anyway, look, we are running out of time here. We're going to start again at the top of the hour. I want to thank you guys both. If this were just the three of us, and I was just listening to the two of you guys, I know you wouldn't take the time just to talk to me, but maybe you would. This was fantastic. It was very useful. Now, this is like the nuts and bolts stuff, guys. This is, if you think of this whole RPA and intelligent automation, this is a critical wrench. It's like saying your metric and your standard tools are all going to work on whatever car you buy. That's a really important point, right? So it is hopefully for those of you who have any touch of the stuff that's going to get into the details, or you're going to do a transition, this has been useful. Our next topic with Mark Chasen is going to be a very broad subject. It's about the investment opportunities and what's going on in a variety of very sophisticated types of technology. So hopefully today you're going to dip in and out of the high, the low, the tactical, the specific. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Everybody log back in at the top of the hour for the next session with Mark Chasen. We'll do an introduction for him briefly and get him to go. Matt, thank you very much. It was great to have you both.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Take care, everybody.